Hi, everybody. Welcome to Unit 2 of our class, where we're going to be talking about the federal and state tax system that relates to nonprofit organizations. We're going to spend a lot of time here specifically because the tax system in the United States probably more heavily shapes the nonprofit sector than any other sector. And you're going to see there are all kinds of really important both policy questions that come up as we discuss this, but also managerial issues. And I'm not going to expect you to know the tax code the way a CPA or a tax attorney would know it, but I do want you to know the policy and managerial issues that relate to all of these tax topics that we're going to cover. I really love this stuff. I find it fascinating, and I think you'll find it really interesting too. So let's jump in. All right, in this class session, we're going to discuss how corporate income taxes work and why nonprofit tax exemption is significant. I want you to also understand the economic value and costs of exempting nonprofits from the corporate income tax. And then I want you to know and articulate the differences between Section 501c3, C4, and C6 status. So let's talk about how corporate income tax works, how corporate income taxes work, and how nonprofits are exempted from them. What you see on the right here is kind of a graphic to illustrate how this works for corporations. The way we tax corporations is they, in a given year, make, let's say, $1 million in revenue. They can then account for business expenses that they incurred during the year, and those offset the revenue that they gained from a tax perspective. And so you can add up all your business expenses in a given year. The salaries that you paid people, the amount you spent on rent or interest on your loans or other things like that. And you add up your expenses. And then if your expenses are less than your revenue, then what you have left over, the remaining revenue, is profit. And profit is what we tax. And so you'll have to pay a percentage tax on the profit that you had that year. Now, what this means is corporations who don't have a profit, meaning that they spent as much or more than they brought in revenue, they are functionally tax exempt. They're not in the sense that nonprofits are tax exempt, but the economic effect is the same in the sense that they don't pay any taxes. And some for-profit companies do this deliberately. They basically take all their revenue from the year and they invest it by spending it and growing their business. And that means there's no profit left over to distribute to shareholders. If a nonprofit corporation that's tax exempt, has something that looks like this little diagram on the right, then that green area that's profit is not taxable. They get to keep all of their profit. They don't have to give a chunk of it over to the government in the form of taxes. And so this is how corporate taxes work. And so when we say that a nonprofit is exempt from taxes, we're saying that if it has a green area like that, it has a section that indicates its profit, it doesn't owe an income tax on that profit. And that means you get to keep extra profit at the end of the year. So what would a tax-exempt entity do with that extra profit? Well, they do the things you'd expect. They expand their programs and services and products. They might invest in infrastructure like renovating a meeting space or buying a fleet of vans, or they might save for future risks and opportunities, and they have that money to save because they didn't have to pay it in the form of taxes to the government. Let's talk about what this means at a bigger scale, though. And you may or may not have had economics at this point, and so I'm going to describe this very simply. And in fact, I'm using pretty rudimentary graphics, but the principle is what I want to emphasize. What you see here is a supply and demand chart. And this graph that indicates supply and demand shows two things. It shows how producers are incentivized to produce things if they can sell them at a given price, and how consumers are willing to buy things if they can buy them at a certain price. The green line you see is called the supply curve. And normally these lines are actually curves, like they're concave shaped. But I'm just lazy, so I'm drawing them straight. And so the green line that goes up as you move to the right is the supply curve. Now here's what this means. On my little graph here, the y-axis, the vertical one, is price. So the higher up you go, the higher the price is for a particular product. And then the x-axis, the one that moves left to right, is quantity, meaning the amount produced of that product. So let's pretend that we're making cereal, like boxes of breakfast cereal. And the way it works is if you're a supplier, if you're this person making boxes of cereal to sell to people, The more boxes of cereal you make, the more expensive it is to make the next one. And so this is why the curve is upward sloping. Now, you may have heard of something like an economy of scale, where the more you make, the cheaper it becomes. That actually wears out in the long term. In the long term, all products get more expensive the more of them that you make. And that's what the green line shows. The blue line shows what's called the demand curve, which is as prices get cheaper for a particular product, more of them will be purchased by consumers. And that makes sense, right? If you have a favorite box of cereal that normally costs $5 and now you only have to pay $2 because of a sale, you're going to buy more of it. And that's what that shows. It shows as price goes down, quantity purchased increases to the right on the chart. Where the two dashed lines meet is what we call equilibrium. And this is where the market price is established. This is what every box of cereal has to cost. You can't charge more than that because you're going to lose, because nobody will buy your cereal. And if you charge less than it, you're giving up a chance to make extra money. So you're going to charge what the market price is. So that's what P star is the market price in this situation. And Q star is going to be the total amount produced. The reason that suppliers won't make more beyond that point is because the next box of cereal they make will cost them more than they can charge for it if they sell it. And so they would lose money on cereal if they kept producing it beyond Q star. And so where these lines intersect is called the equilibrium point, like I mentioned. And this is where you have basically an undisturbed market, or a market without any pressures forcing it to behave differently, or what an economist might call a free market. But let's point out two other things that are interesting on this chart. The green triangle that just appeared is what we would call producer surplus. And what it is the difference for each unit produced, for each item of cereal, boxes of cereal produced. It's the difference between the cost of producing it and the price that they were allowed to charge in the market. And so if you add up for each box of cereal the difference between the cost of production and the price that they could charge, that adds up to be that triangle there called producer surplus. You can think of it roughly as profit. So it roughly reflects the profit of corporations that are selling boxes of cereal. But the economic term for that is producer surplus. The blue triangle here represents consumer surplus. And consumer surplus is illustrated this way. You remember you have a box of cereal you normally buy for $5. Now you can just pay $2. And you're going to be really happy about that. In fact, you're going to be as happy as $3 worth of happiness because you had to give up $2 to get the cereal, but then you get $3 of like bonus utility is what an economist would call it. And this extra happiness you get by having to pay less than what you're willing to pay, that's consumer surplus. And the blue triangle is where you add up all the consumer surplus of everybody who's buying cereal. Now, these triangles are going to be relevant here in a minute. Let's take our nice undisturbed market and let's apply a tax to it. If we impose this kind of a tax, and this is where we apply a per unit tax on suppliers, meaning if you're a person who sells cereal, we're going to tax you a certain amount on each box of cereal that you produce and sell. This is a per unit tax, and let's pretend that it's about $1 per box. And so that upward pointing arrow near the little red triangle, that is let's say that's $1, a price increase. What happens is it increases the cost of supplying cereal, like to produce and make cereal, boxes of cereal available to the public is now more expensive by $1 per box. And that's why our green supply curve goes away and it gets replaced with the yellow one. The other thing you notice happening here is that the quantity of cereal produced because of the tax goes down. So QT is less than Q star was. And the price in the market for cereal goes up. PT is higher than P star was. And what this is basically telling us is that a tax has produced fewer boxes of cereal and made them more expensive. And you can see the effect that has because our producer surplus triangle is smaller than it was before, and our consumer surplus triangle is smaller than it was before. Now, the shrinkage in those two triangles is compensated in part by the money collected in the form of the tax, and so that's what the government takes in. But there's going to be some of that the tax doesn't compensate for. And it's the red triangle there, and the red triangle is called deadweight loss. And deadweight loss is essentially squandered consumer and producer surplus. So this is where we tax everybody selling cereal. But what if we imposed a tax on just some of the people selling cereal? So we went to like General Mills and we said, hey, General Mills, you got to pay a tax on selling cereal. But then we went to Kellogg's and we said, hey, Kellogg's, you get to be tax free. You don't have to pay a tax on selling cereal. Now, that sounds ridiculous and arbitrary to do that. And it would be in the case of selling cereal. But we do have markets where nonprofits and for-profits compete, where the nonprofits are tax exempt and the for-profits have to pay taxes. And that's like, for example, healthcare, where you have nonprofit and for-profit hospitals, or higher education, where you have nonprofit and for-profit universities. What do those markets look like? Well, what we end up with are two supply curves. We have a yellow one, which is the one faced by everybody who's paying taxes, like the for-profit hospitals or universities. And then we have the green supply curve, which is the one faced by everybody who's selling it without paying taxes. And that'd be like nonprofit hospitals or nonprofit universities. And these two supply curves are operating in the market at the same time. The yellow, everybody in the market, both the nonprofit and for-profit ones, are going to produce up to QT, but then the nonprofit providers get to produce all the way up to Q star. So they get to engage in extra production because taxes being removed makes it cheaper for them to keep producing. You'll notice also that the market price goes down, that we go back to P star because that you can keep producing if you're a nonprofit and charge less for it. And everybody who's for-profit just has to accept that this is the new market price. They can't charge more because if they did, they won't sell anything. The green shaded area, not quite a triangle, more of like a weird rhombus, is extra producer surplus that goes to tax-exempt entities. Now, let's talk about this for a minute because the research actually shows that this plays out. One study estimated that giving tax exemption produced an average of 26% increase in nonprofit activity versus for-profit activity. So nonprofits, when they compete with for-profits, get to grow and be bigger because of it. Sometimes there are artificial constraints or other factors that might manipulate the market in a particular way, but absent that, this is how the market works. And so the reason we provide tax exemption in some cases is because it incentivizes more of the thing that we want. We put limits on it. We say, hey, if you're going to be tax exempt, you can't have owners, you can't share profits to shareholders. But we do want more healthcare, we do want more education, so we're going to make a way to provide it through tax exemption. And that's the benefit to all the rest of us. Now, you may think to yourself, healthcare and education are not exactly products that are cheaper. And we're going to talk about why that's the case in class. But it doesn't have to do with tax exemption. Okay, let's talk about some of the nitty-gritty legal aspects of it. Categories of tax exemption in the tax code. We're going to talk about C3 status, C4 status, and C6 status. These come from Section 501C of the Federal Tax Code. You have probably already skimmed this, or you're going to before class. Remember, I do want you to skim it. Don't read it in detail. I just want you to get a sense of what's in there. In there, you're going to find 29 different categories of 501C exempt status. Only one of them, though, is considered charitable, and we're going to separate that out next. C3 status is this charitable organization status, and I want to emphasize a point here. The federal tax definition of charitable is different than the everyday version of charitable. When we use the word, if we say somebody is charitable, we're saying that they're generous, or typically to the poor and the needy. That's not how the IRS defines charity, even though, serving the poor and needy does count for charitable tax status. Charity also includes churches by definition, and scientific research or higher education. Even amateur sports leagues are considered charitable. It's a charitable under the tax code means organizations that qualify for C3 status. And so it's not the same as the everyday use of the word charitable. One thing that's unique or interesting about C3 organizations is that they are very limited in how they participate in influencing legislation, policy, and political campaigns. Now, when I say here insubstantial lobbying is allowed, lobbying here means influencing policy or legislation. So you can influence an administration to enact a certain policy or a legislature to pass a certain bill. You're allowed to do some of that as a nonprofit as long as it's insubstantial compared to the rest of your activities. But if you're going to be a C3, you cannot engage in any political activity. And what that means is you can't endorse somebody for office. And sometimes C3 organizations run into this, and we can talk about some examples in class. The other thing that makes C3 organizations unique is that they're the only exempt category that's allowed to take contributions that are tax deductible, meaning that if you're a donor and you give money to a C3, you can reduce your taxes because of that donation. That's not true for any other exempt category. If you give your money to a C4, you still pay taxes on that. If you give your money to a C6, you still pay taxes on that. So tax deductibility for donations or contributions is another unique feature of C3 or charitable organizations. Okay, let's talk about what C4s are. This is what the IRS calls civic leagues. Employee associations are included, and organizations operating for social welfare, which can mean a lot of different things. These are often membership organizations, like a homeowners association is usually set up as a C4, but they also are common advocacy groups. The NRA is a C4, for example, the ACLU, the NAACP. These are all organized as C4 entities. And it's because they can engage in quite a bit of lobbying. They're not limited on how much lobbying they participate in. And they are unlimited in participating in political campaigns, except that they can't spend more than half of their expenditures on political campaigns. Now, because of a Supreme Court decision from a little over a decade ago called Citizens United, these are also a really popular vehicle for what are called super PACs. PAC stands for Political Action Committee, and the reason they're called super is because these are I don't want to say totally unfettered, but they have very little limitations on how they participate in politics. And another advantage of C4 is if you're using a C4 is that you also don't have to disclose where the money came from. And so there's a lot of dark money in politics that flows through C4 organizations in a way that's pretty controversial, and we can talk about that more in class. C6 organizations are business leagues, but they're often also called trade associations. And what these are groups that exist to advocate for people and support people in a particular industry. So like the Motion Picture Association of America, you've seen their logos in the credits of all movies. They're a C6. The NFL actually even used to be a tax-exempt C6. And that's not because they're considered a business league, but because that code section specifically exempts professional football leagues. Not basketball, baseball, or hockey, just football. We can, maybe in class if you're interested, we can talk about why that happened. But C6s exist for all kinds of industries. There's a trade association representing nurses and grocers and dairy farmers and public school teachers and so on. And so pretty much every occupation or industry has a C6 associated with it. And these are just really popular lobbying groups because they're allowed to lobby, support campaigns, they can endorse candidates, all that stuff. And so this is another kind of tax-exempt entity. These three together are easily the three most common kinds of tax-exempt entities under the federal tax code. Now, all of these, plus the other categories we talked about, are prohibited from benefiting people in a private way, meaning a non-charitable or a non-nonprofit way. The limitation relates to something called inurement, which is a concept we're going to discuss more in session 2.3. And then to wrap things up, here's a handy little table that shows these organizations and distinguishes and compares them on some of the relevant categories we talked about. All right, that's it. I'll see you all in class.